My husband was transferring our life savings to his girlfriend while I was bringing our daughter into the world. He thought he'd left me with nothing, but he never knew about my family's $600 million trust fund. Now this corporate lawyer is about to teach him what happens when you betray the wrong woman. I used to believe that my life had followed a perfect plan. Top of my class at law school, youngest partner at Montgomery & Reed, married to Miles Harrington, the handsome investment banker who swept me off my feet during a corporate merger 5 years ago. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. We lived in our dream home in Beacon Hill, a historic brownstone with high ceilings and original crown molding that we'd spent a year renovating together. At 34, I was exactly where I'd planned to be. Successful career, loving marriage, and finally starting the family I'd always wanted. The nursery was my pride and joy, a soft mint green room with hand-painted clouds drifting across the ceiling and a collection of children's books I'd been gathering since I'd learned I was pregnant. Every night, Miles would rest his hand on my growing belly and we'd talk about our daughter's future. She'd be brilliant, he insisted. She'd have my determination and his charm. We'd already agreed to name her Olivia, after my grandmother. "You're sure you want to take a full year off?" Miles had asked one evening as I reviewed my maternity leave paperwork. We were sitting in our kitchen, the marble island between us covered with legal documents and a half-eaten container of the ice cream I'd been craving nightly. "The firm is offering it, and I've billed enough hours for 3 lifetimes," I'd replied, signing the papers with my Mont Blanc pen, a gift from Miles on our 3rd anniversary. Besides, we can afford it. We could afford it because we'd been careful. We'd saved diligently, invested wisely. Our joint account held just over $1.2 million, our safety net, our daughter's college fund, our future. I'd insisted on financial transparency from the beginning, a habit instilled by my father, a federal judge who'd seen too many marriages destroyed by financial secrets. What my husband didn't know was that I had secrets of my own. Not the kind that would destroy us, or so I thought, but the kind that my family had always kept close. The Blackwood fortune, accumulated over generations of shipping and real estate investments, had always been managed discreetly. My grandfather had established trust funds for all his grandchildren, but with specific conditions. We wouldn't receive full control until we turned 35 or had our first child, whichever came later. I'd never mentioned it to Miles. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I'd been raised to believe that true character was revealed when people didn't know you had money. My parents had insisted I make my own way, earn my own success. The trust was a safety net, not a shortcut. Besides, at $600 million, it wasn't just money, it was power, responsibility, a legacy. I wanted to be sure I was ready. I wanted to be sure we were ready. The morning my water broke was unseasonably warm for Boston in April. Miles had been acting strange for weeks. Late nights at the office, mysterious phone calls he'd take in another room, a new password on his day. Phone that hadn't been there before. But I'd dismissed my concerns as pregnancy paranoia, choosing to believe that he was just working hard to provide for our growing family. "It's time," I'd said, shaking him awake at 3:42 a.m., trying to keep my voice steady despite the contractions that were already coming faster than I'd expected for early labor. Miles had jumped out of bed, his eyes wide with what I'd interpreted as excitement but later realized was panic. He'd helped me into the car, kissed me quickly, and promised to meet me at the hospital after grabbing the overnight bag we'd forgotten in our rush. "I'll be right behind you," he'd said, his voice oddly strained. "Edwina will meet you there. She's already on her way." Edwina Lawrence had been my best friend since our first day at Harvard Law. She was brilliant, fiercely loyal, and had an uncanny ability to see through people's facades. Miles had never seemed entirely comfortable around her, which I'd attributed to her tendency to ask uncomfortably direct questions. Now I understand he'd sensed her suspicion all along. The next 12 hours were a blur of pain, determination, and ultimately, joy. Olivia Blackwood Harrington entered the world at 3:17 p.m., a healthy 7 pounds, 8 ounces of perfection with a full head of dark hair and her father's dimples. Edwina had stayed by my side the entire time, holding my hand, encouraging me through each contraction, wiping my brow when the pain became almost unbearable. Miles never arrived. His texts came in a steady stream of excuses. Accident on the Mass Pike. Traffic backed up for miles. Battery dying, will update soon. At hour 6, Edwina's expression had hardened. Amber, I need to tell you something, but not now, not while you're doing this. Focus on bringing that beautiful baby girl into the world. We'll deal with everything else after. Her words had sent a chill through me despite the sweat beading on my skin, but she was right. I needed to focus. So I pushed aside the nagging worry, the growing suspicion, and channeled all my energy into the task at hand. When Olivia was finally placed on my chest, her tiny body warm against my skin, her cries subsiding as she found comfort in the familiar sound of my heartbeat, I felt a love so overwhelming it brought tears to my eyes. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not Miles's absence, not Edwina's cryptic warning. But reality has a way of intruding even on life's most sacred moments. As I held my daughter, marveling at her perfect features, Edwina stepped outside to take a call. When she returned, her face was ashen. What is it? I asked, immediately alert despite my exhaustion. She hesitated, then sat on the edge of the hospital bed. Amber, I had Henrietta check your accounts. Henrietta Morris was the third member of our law school trio, now specializing in financial crimes at the SEC. My brain, foggy from labor and flooded with hormones, took a moment to process the implications. Why would you... My voice trailed off as understanding dawned. Miles transferred everything from your joint accounts this morning, right after he dropped you off. All $1.2 million gone. The room seemed to tilt. That's not possible. There must be some mistake. Edwina didn't respond. Instead, she handed me her phone. On the screen was a bank statement showing a series of transfers, each one moving money from our joint account to an unfamiliar one. The final transfer had been completed at 9:23 a.m., while I was in the most painful stage of labor. There's more, Edwina said softly. The account belongs to someone named Pippa Westbrook. Henrietta did some digging. She swiped to the next screen, an Instagram photo of Miles at a restaurant I didn't recognize, his arm around a stunning blonde woman. The caption read, "Weekend getaway with this handsome man. Blessed, one love." The date, 6 months ago, when I was 3 months pregnant. As the reality of his betrayal crashed over me, Olivia stirred against my chest, her tiny hand grasping my finger. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The shock and pain didn't disappear, but they were joined by something else. A cold, clear determination I recognized from my toughest court battles. Miles Harrington thought he'd left his pregnant wife with nothing while he ran off with his girlfriend and our life savings. He was about to discover how wrong he was. The next 24 hours passed in a surreal haze. The joy of Olivia's birth collided with the devastation of Miles's betrayal, creating a disorienting emotional whiplash. I moved through the necessary motions, feeding my daughter, speaking with doctors, signing discharge papers, with a mechanical efficiency that masked the storm brewing inside me. Edwina had taken charge in her characteristically efficient manner, making calls, coordinating with Henrietta, and ensuring that Miles would not be permitted into the maternity ward should he decide to make an appearance. He didn't. He's turned off his phone, Henrietta reported during her visit the next morning. She brought coffee, real coffee, not the hospital's watery excuse for it, and a determination that matched my own growing resolve. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But I've got eyes on the money. He hasn't moved it again. Yet, I said, adjusting Olivia in my arms as she nursed. The fierce protectiveness I felt for this tiny human had crystallized my shock into something harder, sharper. We should talk about your options, Edwina began carefully. She sat in the visitor's chair beside my bed, her legal pad already filled with notes. Always prepared, always 3 steps ahead. It's why she'd made such a formidable defense attorney. First, we contact the banks, she continued. We report fraud, unauthorized transfers. Then No, I interrupted, my voice quiet but firm. Not yet. Both women looked at me with surprise. Amber. He took everything. Henrietta reminded me, her voice gentle but urgent. Your savings, Olivia's college fund. I know exactly what he took, I replied, looking down at my daughter's perfect face. And I know exactly what he doesn't know he left behind. I explained about the trust fund, about my impending 35th birthday, about the clause that had now been activated by Olivia's birth. Their expressions shifted from concern to astonishment. $600 million, Edwina repeated, as if testing whether the words made sense when spoken aloud. Yes, I confirmed, and Miles has no idea it exists. A moment of silence filled the room as the implications sank in. So what are you thinking? Henrietta finally asked, her analytical mind already racing ahead. I'm thinking, I said, feeling a cold clarity settle over me, that we let him believe he's won. For now. My phone chimed with a text message. I nodded toward it on the bedside table, and Edwina handed it to me. Miles had finally surfaced. Emergency. At work. Tried to call. How are you and the baby? We'll be there soon. No congratulations. No questions about his daughter. No acknowledgement of his absence during one of the most significant moments of our lives. I handed the phone back to Edwina without responding. He thinks I don't know yet, I said. He probably assumes I haven't checked our accounts, that I've been too busy with the baby. Which gives us time, Henrietta noted, already typing furiously on her laptop. Time for what? Edwina asked, though her slight smile suggested she already knew the answer. Time to build a case, I replied, lawyer, mode fully engaged despite my physical exhaustion. Time to understand exactly what he's done and with whom. Time to contact my family's trust attorneys and activate my inheritance without tipping him off. And then? Edwina prompted. I looked down at Olivia, now sleeping peacefully in my arms, unaware of the seismic shifts occurring in her new world. And then we make sure he never does this to anyone else again. By the time Miles finally appeared at the hospital that evening, I had formulated the first phase of my plan. He arrived with an armful of roses, dark circles under his eyes, and an expression carefully crafted to convey exhausted devotion. Had I not seen the evidence of his betrayal, I might have believed it. There she is, he whispered, approaching, the bassinet where Olivia slept. She's perfect. He turned to me, bending to kiss my forehead. You're both perfect. I'm so sorry I missed it. I allowed myself to meet his gaze, searching those familiar blue eyes for any sign of the man I thought I'd married. All I found was a well-rehearsed performance. It's okay, I lied, summoning years of courtroom experience to keep my voice steady. These things happen. Relief washed over his features. It was absolute chaos. The pike was at a standstill, and then when I finally got through, there was an emergency at the office. The Shanghai deal almost collapsed. Miles, I interrupted gently, touching his arm. It's okay. We're okay. He sat on the edge of the bed, taking my hand in his. I've been so worried about you, both of you. We'll be discharged tomorrow, I said. The doctor says everything looks good. That's wonderful, he replied, squeezing my hand. I've got everything ready at home. I nodded, fighting the urge to pull my hand away. I checked our account earlier, I said casually, watching his face. I was thinking we should start looking into those college savings plans we talked about. A flicker of panic crossed his features, so quick I would have missed it if I hadn't been looking for it. Ah, yes, definitely, he stammered. Though maybe we should wait until things settle down a bit. Of course, I agreed. No rush. He visibly relaxed, unaware that his reaction had confirmed everything. You must be exhausted, I continued. Why? Don't you go home and get some rest? We'll be fine here, and you'll need your energy for when we come home tomorrow. Are you sure? He asked, a touch too eagerly. Positive. Go. After he left, I allowed myself a moment to process the reality of what had just happened. I had lied to the face of the man who had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. I had pretended not to know that he had stolen our future while I brought our child into the world. But underneath the hurt, a steely determination was taking root. Miles thought he was clever, that he had orchestrated the perfect escape. He believed I was still the trusting, accommodating wife who would never suspect his deception. He had no idea who he was actually dealing with. I pulled out my phone and sent identical texts to Edwina and Henrietta. Phase 1 complete. He suspects nothing. Start Phase 2. Then I looked at my sleeping daughter and made her a silent promise. He will never hurt us again. The homecoming was a masterclass in deception, his and mine. Miles had cleaned the house, prepared the nursery, and stocked the refrigerator with my favorite foods. Every detail was calculated to project the image of the devoted husband and father, eager to support his expanding family. If I hadn't seen the bank statements with my own eyes, his performance might have been convincing. I've taken 2 weeks off, he announced as he carried Olivia's car seat into the house, his voice brimming with false sincerity. Richardson wasn't happy, but I told him my girls needed me. My girls. The casual possessiveness in his tone made my skin crawl, but I maintained my facade of grateful exhaustion. That's wonderful. Thank you. I settled onto the living room sofa, wincing slightly at the post-delivery discomfort. I'm sure you have a lot to catch up on, though. Nothing more important than this, he insisted, carefully lifting Olivia from her car seat. He held her with surprising competence, cooing softly as he cradled her against his chest. The genuine affection in his eyes as he gazed at our daughter was perhaps the most confusing element of his betrayal. How could he look at her with such love while simultaneously undermining her future? Over the next few days, Miles played his role flawlessly. He changed diapers, brought me water during middle-of-the-night feedings, and fielded congratulatory calls from friends and colleagues. To the outside world, we were the perfect new family, navigating the exhausting but rewarding early days of parenthood. Behind this domestic facade, however, I was gathering intelligence. While Miles showered, I copied contacts from his phone. When he slept, I documented his recent calls. During his brief trips to pick up groceries, which I suspected were actually check-ins with Pippa, I searched his briefcase and office. The picture that emerged was both more complex and more damning than I had initially thought. This wasn't just an affair. It was a calculated exit strategy. Receipts from a real estate agent specializing in overseas properties, brochures for private schools in Zurich, a dog-eared copy of Living and Working in Switzerland, A Survival. Handbook. Most telling was the business card tucked into his passport. Mason Blackwell, private banking, with a handwritten note on the back, all set for transfer on May 15th. Just 3 weeks away. Edwina came by regularly, ostensibly to help with the baby, but actually to exchange information. We spoke in coded references while Miles was within, earshot, discussing that case from last year or the Johnson settlement. When he was out of the room, we spoke freely. Henrietta's contact at the SEC is interested, she murmured one afternoon while Miles was on a conference call in his home office. The timing of the transfers, the pattern of withdrawals leading up to it, it all suggests premeditation. Criminal. Charges? I asked, keeping my voice low as I burped Olivia. Possibly, but we need more. His communications with this Pippa woman, evidence of planning, maybe testimony from others at his firm. Has he mentioned anyone named Charlie recently? I frowned. Charlie Peters? He's on Miles's team. Why? Henrietta found some interesting communications. It looks like Charlie might be involved somehow. This new information rattled me more than I expected. Charlie had been at our wedding. He'd brought his wife to our dinner parties, sent flowers when we announced my pregnancy. The scope of the betrayal seemed to be expanding, reaching into every corner of the life I thought I'd built. That night, as I fed Olivia at 2 a.m., I found myself staring at Miles's sleeping form, studying the face I'd woken up beside for 5 years. Had any of it been real? How long had he been planning this? The questions circled in my mind like hungry wolves, threatening to devour the last shreds of my composure. For the first time since discovering his betrayal, I felt tears burning behind my eyes. Not for the loss of him. That grief would come later, but for the loss of certainty. I'd built my career on my ability to read people, to anticipate their moves, to understand their motivations. Yet I'd missed the deception unfolding in my own home. I trusted you, I whispered to his sleeping form. I believed in us. He stirred slightly, but didn't wake. Just as well. I wasn't ready for that confrontation. Not yet. The following morning, Miles announced he needed to go into the office for a few hours. Emergency meeting, he explained, not quite meeting my eyes. The Shanghai deal again. Of course, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. We'll be fine. Edwina's coming by later anyway. He hesitated at the door, then returned to kiss Olivia's forehead, and, after a moment's hesitation, mine as well. I love you both, he said, with such conviction that for a split second I almost believed him. After the door closed behind him, I moved quickly. I called Edwina, who arrived within 20 minutes, bringing Henrietta with her. We've got a problem, Henrietta announced without preamble, opening her laptop on the kitchen island. Or rather, another problem. She pulled up a series of documents, financial, statements I didn't recognize, transactions involving large sums moving between unfamiliar accounts. What am I looking at? I asked, adjusting Olivia in my arms. These are from Montgomery & Reed's client trust accounts, she explained, her expression grim. Specifically, ones Miles had access to as part of the Shanghai merger. The implication hit me like a physical blow. He's been embezzling from my firm? Henrietta nodded. It looks that way. Small amounts at first, starting about 8 months ago, but larger sums more recently. The pattern suggests he's been testing the waters, seeing what he could get away with. My God, I whispered, sinking onto a bar stool. This wasn't just about our marriage, our joint accounts. This was criminal activity that could implicate my own firm, my partners, my colleagues, my professional reputation. There's more, Edwina said gently. We found Pippa. She pulled out her phone and showed me a series of photos. Miles and Pippa at a restaurant, at what appeared to be a Swiss chalet, boarding a private jet. In every image, they looked intimate, comfortable, a couple, with history. These go back 18 months, Edwina explained. Well before your pregnancy. 18 months. While I was working 70-hour weeks to make partner, while we were trying to conceive, while I was experiencing morning sickness and planning our future, he had been building a separate life with another woman. And this is from last night, Henrietta added, showing me a final photo. Miles and Pippa outside an apartment building in Back Bay, him kissing her against the door. The last thread of doubt snapped. The evidence was irrefutable. Miles hadn't just betrayed me, he'd constructed an elaborate double life that now threatened everything I'd worked for. I took a deep breath, pushed aside the renewed sting of betrayal, and forced myself to think like the lawyer I was. We need to move faster than we thought. If he's embezzling from client accounts, this isn't just about me anymore. Edwina nodded. What do you want to do? I looked down at Olivia, peaceful in my arms, unaware of the chaos swirling around her. Then I looked back at my two closest friends, determination hardening my resolve. It's time to activate the trust. And then we're going to build a case so airtight he'll never see daylight again. Ms. Blackwood, please understand that while your situation is unfortunate, activating a trust of this magnitude requires proper procedure. Harold Winters, senior partner at Winters, Hathaway and Burke, and trustee of the Blackwood family fortune for over 30 years, peered at me over his wire-rimmed glasses with an expression of practiced sympathy. We sat in the firm's wood-paneled conference room, Olivia asleep in her carrier beside me. I'd insisted on bringing her, partly because I was breastfeeding, but mostly because her presence was a tangible reminder of what I was fighting for. I understand the procedures, Harold, I replied, keeping my voice even. I'm a lawyer, remember? The trust stipulates that I gain full control upon turning 35 or having my first child, whichever occurs later. Olivia is 5 days old. The conditions have been met. Harold sighed, adjusting the stack of documents before him. Yes, technically, but your grandfather built in certain discretionary elements, given the circumstances. My circumstances are precisely why we need to move quickly, I interrupted. My husband has embezzled from client accounts at my firm, stolen our joint savings, and plans to leave the country within weeks. Every day we delay puts the assets at greater risk. From across the table, my father cleared his throat. Judge William Blackwood, retired from the federal bench but still commanding respect with his mere presence, had listened silently until now. Harold, he said, his deep voice carrying the weight of 50 years of friendship, my daughter is not requesting a favor. She is exercising her legal right to what is hers. I suggest we proceed accordingly. Harold hesitated, glancing between us. My father had always been my strongest advocate, though his support typically came with expectations of excellence. Today, however, there was no judgment in his gaze, only fierce protection. Very well, Harold conceded. I'll have the papers drawn up immediately, but, he added, fixing me with a pointed look, I strongly recommend discretion. If your husband is indeed planning what you suggest, alerting him to these assets prematurely could complicate matters. I'm well aware, I assured him, which is why we're not just activating the trust, we're restructuring it. I slid a document across the table, one I'd prepared with Edwina's help during late-night strategy sessions while Miles slept obliviously nearby. I want the assets moved to these new entities, with these specific protections in place. Harold skimmed the document, his eyebrows rising incrementally. This is quite comprehensive. It needs to be, I replied simply. As Harold excused himself to consult with his associates, my father moved to sit beside me. He reached out tentatively, touching Olivia's tiny hand with a gentleness few people ever witnessed from the formidable Judge Blackwood. You're doing the right thing, he said quietly. Protecting yourself, protecting her. I nodded, unexpected emotion tightening my throat. I just keep wondering how I missed it. All those years, all those signs. Don't, he interrupted firmly. I've seen this countless times from the bench. These people, they're skillful manipulators. They show you exactly what you expect to see. But I'm trained to look deeper, I insisted, to question, to verify. Instead, I trusted completely. Because trust is what decent people do, my father replied. The failure here is his, not yours. The simplicity of his statement cut through the self-recrimination that had been haunting me. For the first time since discovering Miles's betrayal, I felt the crushing weight of personal failure begin to lift. Now, my father continued, his tone shifting from comforting to tactical. Tell me about this evidence you're gathering. I outlined what we'd discovered so far: the transfers, the relationship with Pippa, the suspicious activities at my firm, the plans for relocation. With each revelation, my father's expression grew darker. This is more than just divorce territory, he observed. This is criminal. I know, I acknowledged. But I need to be strategic. If I report the embezzlement immediately, he might flee before we can build a complete case. If I confront him about the affair, he'll know I'm onto him and accelerate his plans. So you're playing along, my father surmised, letting him think you're oblivious while you build your case. Exactly. But it's... I hesitated, searching for the right word. Exhausting, he supplied. Having to pretend, to smile at someone who's betrayed you so completely. I nodded, grateful for his understanding. My father had experienced his own betrayals, professional, not personal, during his years on the bench. He knew the toll that maintaining appearances could take. You need allies, he said decisively. Not just Edwina and Henrietta, capable as they are. You need people with specific expertise. Before I could respond, Harold returned with a younger associate trailing behind him, arms laden with documents. We've prepared the preliminary paperwork, Harold announced. The trust will be activated today, with the restructuring to follow pending legal review. Within 48 hours, you'll have access to the first tier of assets. Thank you, Harold, I said, relief washing over me. The financial security this represented wasn't just about money. It was about options, leverage, protection. As we worked through the seemingly endless stack of documents, my phone vibrated with incoming messages. Miles, checking in with practiced concern, asking how his girls were doing, mentioning he might be late again due to complications with the Shanghai deal. Each message was a fresh reminder of his deception, but also confirmation that my charade was working. He suspected nothing. When we finally finished, my father insisted on accompanying me home. Just to get you settled, he said, though we both knew he wanted to assess the situation firsthand. Upon arriving at the brownstone, we found Edwina waiting on the front steps, her expression tense. What is it? I asked immediately, recognizing the specific furrow of her brow that appeared only during our most challenging cases. Your friend Charlie came by, she said, glancing meaningfully at my father before continuing. He seemed anxious. Said he needed to speak with you urgently. Charlie? I frowned, mentally reviewing what Henrietta had discovered about his potential involvement. Did he say what about? No, but he left this. She handed me a folded note. Inside, scrawled hastily, Need to talk. Not what you think. Be careful who you trust. Meet me at the old place, 7 p.m. The old place could only mean the law school, Library Carroll, where Miles and I had first met during a corporate law study group. Charlie had been there too. It could be a trap, my father observed, reading over my shoulder. Or it could be a warning, I countered. Charlie always seemed uncomfortable around Pippa. Maybe he's having second thoughts about whatever they've planned. Edwina nodded thoughtfully. If Charlie's willing to talk, he could be our key witness. But you can't go alone. I won't, I assured her, already formulating a plan. Dad, can you stay with Olivia? Edwina, call Henrietta. We need surveillance equipment and a recorder. As they mobilized, I prepared myself mentally for the coming confrontation. Charlie might provide the missing pieces we needed, or he might alert Miles to my investigation. Either way, this meeting would mark a turning point. I changed into clothes that projected casual confidence, a nursing-friendly wrap dress, comfortable flats, nothing that suggested I was treating this as anything. more than a friendly catch-up. As I prepared a bottle of expressed milk for Olivia, I realized my hands were steady, my mind clear. The initial shock of betrayal had crystallized into purpose. For the first time since Olivia's birth, I felt like myself again. Not just a new mother, not just a betrayed wife, but Amber Blackwood, the attorney who had never lost a case. And Miles Harrington was about to become my most important victory. Harvard Law School hadn't changed in the years since graduation. The same imposing architecture, the same hallowed quiet, the same sense of history pressing down from every ornate ceiling. As I navigated the familiar corridors toward the library, I felt an unexpected nostalgia for the person I'd been in these halls, determined, ambitious, and utterly certain about my future. Edwina trailed 20 paces behind me, pretending to be absorbed in her phone but actually documenting everything. Henrietta had positioned herself at a study table near the library entrance, equipment discreetly arranged to record any conversation within a 10-foot radius. "Audio check," I murmured into the small microphone concealed in my necklace. "A gift?" From my father just hours earlier. "Crystal clear," Henrietta's voice confirmed through the nearly invisible earpiece. The library carrel, where Miles and I had spent countless hours reviewing case law, was tucked in a remote corner of the third floor stacks. As I approached, I could see Charlie already waiting, his lanky frame hunched over the small desk, fingers drumming nervously on its surface. He looked up at my approach, relief washing over his features. "Amber, thank God." "Charlie," I acknowledged, sliding into the seat opposite him. "You wanted to talk?" He glanced around furtively before leaning forward. "I don't have much time. Miles thinks I'm at a client dinner." "What's going on, Charlie?" I kept my tone casual, curious but not accusatory. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, a gesture I'd seen hundreds of times during exam periods. "It's not what you think. Well, not entirely. Miles is in trouble. Serious trouble." "What kind of trouble?" I asked, though I already had a good idea. "He's been moving money around. Client funds. Started small, but it's escalated. He said it was temporary, just to cover some personal investments that went south." Charlie swallowed hard. "I helped him at first, just with the paperwork, just once or twice. But then it became more," I prompted when he faltered. He nodded miserably. He needed access to larger accounts, ones he couldn't reach without additional signatures. I provided them. I didn't ask questions because I didn't want to know. "And Pippa?" The name slipped out before I could stop myself. Charlie's head snapped up, eyes widening. "You know about Pippa?" I kept my expression neutral. "I know enough." He slumped back in his chair. "She's not just his girlfriend, Amber. She's a fixer, specializes in helping people disappear. New identities, offshore accounts, the works." The confirmation sent a chill through me despite my preparation. Hearing it stated so plainly made the betrayal freshly raw. "How long?" I asked, proud of how steady my voice remained. "The affair?" "At least 1.5 years. The embezzlement started about 8 months ago when some cryptocurrency investments went bad. But the exit plan..." He hesitated. "That accelerated when you got pregnant." He panicked. My hand instinctively moved to my stomach, now flat again, but still tender. "He panicked because of our baby?" Charlie looked pained. "He never wanted children, Amber. He told everyone it was your idea, that he was going along with it to keep you happy while he finalized his departure. The casual cruelty of it struck me with physical force. All those nights discussing names, his hand on my growing belly, his seemingly genuine excitement at the ultrasound appointments, all carefully calculated performances. "Why are you telling me this now?" I managed to ask. "Because it's gone too far," Charlie replied, rubbing his face wearily. "The amounts he's taking have become significant enough that people will notice soon. And when they do, he plans to be gone, along with all the money, leaving me holding the bag. And you want, what? Immunity? A head start? He shook his head. I want to make it right. I've been keeping records, transfers, meetings, communications. It's all here. He slid a USB drive across the table. Everything you need to stop him. I stared at the small device, suspicion warring with hope. Why should I trust you, Charlie? Because I was there when he fell in love with you, he said quietly. And I was there when he started planning to destroy you. What he's doing. It's not just criminal, it's cruel, and I can't be part of it anymore. I picked up the drive, turning it over in my fingers. What's his timeline? May 15th, everything transfers to untraceable accounts. By May 16th, he'll be gone. Charlie leaned forward intently. But Amber, you need to be careful. If he suspects you know anything— I've been pretending for days, I interrupted. I can keep pretending. His expression softened into something like admiration. You always were the best of us in court. Miles used to say no one could read a witness like you could. The irony wasn't lost on me. Except him, apparently. Charlie shook his head. Don't blame yourself. He studied you, Amber. Learned exactly what you wanted to hear, how to behave to earn your trust. It's what he does. As I absorbed this, a notification chimed on Charlie's phone. He checked it, his face paling. I have to go. Miles is trying to reach me. He stood abruptly. Be careful. And Amber? I'm sorry. For everything. I watched him hurry away, the USB drive heavy in my palm. Through my earpiece, I heard Henrietta's whispered confirmation. Got it all. Crystal clear. As I made my way back to the library entrance, Edwina fell into step beside me. That was unexpected, she murmured. But useful, I replied. Very useful. Outside, the spring evening was mild. Harvard Yard bathed in soft twilight. Students moved between buildings, their futures still unwritten, their paths still certain in their minds. I envied them their certainty, even as I embraced my new clarity of purpose. Miles had underestimated me for the last time. With Charlie's evidence added to what we'd already gathered, the trap was nearly ready. All I needed now was the perfect moment to spring it. Back at our brownstone, with Olivia sleeping peacefully under my father's watchful eye, we examined Charlie's USB drive. The data it contained exceeded my expectations. Detailed records of every transaction, email exchanges between Miles and Pippa discussing their plans, and most damning of all, recordings of phone conversations in which Miles explicitly outlined his intention to frame Charlie for the embezzlement while he started fresh overseas. This is gold, Henrietta whispered, scanning through financial records with practiced efficiency. Pure, admissible gold. He recorded everything, Edwina marveled, scrolling through folders meticulously organized by date and subject. Charlie must have been planning his exit strategy almost as long as Miles has. I cradled a cup of tea in my hands, watching their analysis with a strange detachment. The evidence before us painted a picture of a man I didn't recognize, calculating, ruthless, devoid of the basic decency I'd attributed to him throughout our marriage. The most recent transfer was yesterday, Henrietta noted, pointing to a transaction record. $245,000 from the Danville account to something called Westbrook Holdings. Pippa Westbrook, I murmured, connecting the dots. He's not even being subtle anymore. My father, who had been silently observing from an armchair near Olivia's bassinet, finally spoke. He's getting careless. That's good. Careless people make mistakes. He's already made his biggest mistake, I replied, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. He chose the wrong woman to betray. The doorbell rang, startling us all. A quick check of the security camera revealed Harold Winters on our doorstep, alone and carrying a leather portfolio. I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow, I said after letting him in. Some developments couldn't wait, he replied cryptically, nodding respectfully to my father before acknowledging Edwina and Henrietta, with a slight bow. In the dining room, Harold spread several documents across the table. The trust activation is complete, he announced. As of 4:30 p.m. today, you have full access to all Blackwood family assets. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt a curious weightlessness, as if one of the anchors tethering me to my old reality had been severed. There's something else, Harold continued, producing a final document from his portfolio. Your grandfather anticipated potential complications. He included a specific provision I wasn't authorized to reveal until the trust was activated. I scanned the document, confusion giving way to astonishment. This can't be right. I assure you it is, Harold confirmed. Your grandfather acquired a controlling interest in Harrington Financial 27 years ago, when Miles's father nearly bankrupted the company through a series of ill-advised ventures. The acquisition was conducted through a series of shell companies to avoid publicity. Miles's family company, I clarified, still processing the implications. The company that launched his career. The company he believes his family still controls, Harold corrected. In reality, it's been part of the Blackwood portfolio for nearly 3 decades. Your grandfather maintained the fiction to allow the Harrington name to continue, believing it was better for business stability. The irony was almost too perfect. While Miles had been siphoning funds and plotting his escape, the company he viewed as his birthright had actually belonged to my family all along. Does Miles know? I asked. No one outside this room knows, Harold assured me. Your grandfather insisted on absolute secrecy. The arrangement was handled through offshore entities and blind trusts. My father chuckled softly. Classic Jonathan. He always did enjoy a long game. I studied the ownership documents, a plan forming in my mind. Harold, if I were to make changes at Harrington Financial, significant changes, how quickly could they be implemented? As controlling shareholder? Immediately. The paperwork would take time, but your authority would be effective upon your signature. I exchanged glances with Edwina, who nodded slightly, already following my thinking. Draw up the papers, I instructed Harold. I want everything ready by May 14th. After Harold departed, we returned to analyzing Charlie's evidence, now with a new dimension to our strategy. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture more complete than I had dared hope for. We should involve the authorities, my father suggested. With evidence this substantial— Not yet, I interrupted. Miles still has access to significant funds. If he's tipped off prematurely, he could disappear before we're ready. And what exactly are we getting ready for? Edwina asked, though her smile suggested she already knew. Justice, I replied simply. On my terms. The next morning, Miles returned from what he claimed was an early meeting, bringing coffee and pastries as a peace offering for his continued absences. I accepted his kiss on my cheek with practiced ease, maintaining the facade of the understanding, slightly overwhelmed new mother. How's our princess? He asked, peering into Olivia's bassinet where she slept. Perfect, I answered truthfully. Dad's coming by again today. He's completely smitten with her. Miles's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. He had never been comfortable around my father, perhaps sensing the judge's innate ability to see through pretense. Actually, he said, checking his watch, I need to head back to the office soon. This Shanghai situation is becoming a nightmare. Of course, I replied, keeping my tone light. We understand, don't we, Olivia? I stroked our daughter's cheek, gently. As Miles gathered his things, I noticed him glance surreptitiously at the stack of mail on the counter. I had deliberately placed an envelope from our bank on top, knowing it would catch his attention. Everything okay? He asked, gesturing toward the mail with feigned casualness. Oh, just routine statements. Nothing urgent. The relief in his eyes was unmistakable. He had no idea I'd already transferred my personal funds to new accounts, leaving the joint accounts as bait to monitor his activities. After he left, I moved to the window, watching as he walked to his car. Just before getting in, he pulled out his phone, typing rapidly, reporting to Pippa, no doubt, that his unsuspecting wife remained oblivious to their plans. "Enjoy it while it lasts," I whispered to his retreating figure. "May 15th is coming sooner than you think." The days passed in a carefully choreographed dance of deception. Miles played the role of devoted, if frequently absent, new father. I performed the part of the trusting wife, too absorbed in caring for our newborn to notice his increasingly obvious absences. We circled each other in a house once filled with genuine affection, now merely a stage for our mutual pretense. Behind the scenes, however, I was building a case so airtight it would make a federal prosecutor weep with joy. With Charlie's evidence as our foundation, Henrietta had traced the money through a labyrinth of accounts, documenting each transfer with meticulous precision. Edwina had compiled a timeline of Miles's affair with Pippa, gathering witness statements from hotel staff, restaurant servers, and even the pilot of the private jet they'd used for weekend getaways, all paid for with embezzled funds. Meanwhile, my father had made discreet inquiries among his former colleagues at the Department of Justice, laying groundwork without revealing specifics. Harold had expedited the trust restructuring, creating a financial fortress around my assets that not even the most aggressive litigation could penetrate. But it was a single discovery, made exactly 1 week before Miles's planned departure, that transformed my approach from pragmatic to personal. "You need to see this," Henrietta said, arriving unannounced on a Tuesday afternoon. Miles was supposedly in New York for meetings. In reality, he was at a Boston hotel with Pippa, finalizing their escape. She handed me a folder containing documents I didn't immediately recognize. Medical records, not financial statements or legal correspondence. "What am I looking at?" I asked, scanning the unfamiliar format. "Pippa's medical records," Henrietta explained. "Charlie mentioned she had been to a private clinic in Switzerland last year, so I did some digging." I frowned, uncertain of the relevance. "And?" "She's pregnant, Amber. 4 months along." The words hit me with physical force. I sank into a chair, the documents trembling in my hands. 4 months, I repeated, doing the mental calculation. While I was 7 months pregnant with Olivia. Henrietta nodded grimly. "There's more. Look at the patient information form." I flipped to the next page, scanning until I found what she was referring to. Under financial responsibility, Pippa had listed spouse Miles Harrington. "They're married?" I whispered, disbelief warring with a strange hollow feeling in my chest. "Not legally, not yet, but they're presenting themselves as married, at least at this clinic." Henrietta hesitated. "There's one more thing, the last page." I turned to it, then stopped, staring at the genetic screening results. "This can't be right." "I had the same reaction," Henrietta confirmed, "but I verified it through 3 different sources." The genetic screening showed a condition I was all too familiar with, the same rare blood disorder that ran in my family, that my grandfather had suffered from, that I had been tested for during my own pregnancy. Miles has been using my medical insurance for Pippa, I realized, the pieces clicking into place. He's been listing her as me. "Insurance fraud on top of everything else," Henrietta agreed. "But more importantly, the baby might have the same condition as my grandfather," I finished her thought. "A condition that's only detectable with specific tests that aren't standard in prenatal screening." The implications were staggering. While betraying me in the most intimate way possible, Miles had unknowingly entangled our families at a genetic level. Somewhere in Switzerland, Pippa was carrying a child who might share the same rare blood disorder as my relatives, a condition that, if not properly monitored and treated from birth, could lead to serious complications. I looked up at Henrietta, my decision crystallizing. "We need to move now, not May 15th. Now." She nodded, already pulling out her phone. "I'll call Edwina. What's the plan?" "Get everyone here in 2 hours, and find out exactly where Miles and Pippa are right now." I stood, a cold clarity settling over me. It's time they learned exactly who they've been dealing with. By late afternoon, the brownstone had transformed into a command center. My father had called in a favor with a former colleague who now headed the financial crimes division at the FBI. Harold had arrived with the final trust documents requiring only my signature to activate. Edwina had prepared legal filings ready, to be submitted to the court at a moment's notice, and nestled in her bassinet, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering around her, Olivia slept peacefully. "Miles and Pippa are at the Archer Hotel downtown," Henrietta reported, setting up her laptop. "They've booked the suite for the next 2 nights." "And you're certain about this approach?" my father asked, his concern evident. "Once we move, there's no going back. No possibility of a quiet resolution." I looked around at the people who had rallied to my side, who had helped me transform from victim to architect of justice. Then I glanced at my daughter, the ultimate innocent in this tangled web of deceit, I'm certain, I replied. "Miles chose this path when he decided to steal from my firm, empty our accounts, and start a second family while I was carrying his child." I picked up the pen Harold had placed before me. Now I'm choosing how this story ends. With deliberate strokes, I signed the documents that would activate the restructured trust, assert control over Harrington Financial, and initiate legal proceedings against my husband. Each signature felt like severing another tie to the life I had believed was real. "Call the FBI," I instructed my father as I signed the final page. "Tell them where to find him." Then I turned to Edwina, my oldest friend and fiercest advocate. "Get the car. We're going to pay Pippa a visit while the agents collect Miles." "Are you sure that's wise?" Harold cautioned. "Given her condition?" "I'm not going to cause her stress," I assured him. "I'm going to save her baby's life." As I prepared to leave, I bent to kiss Olivia's forehead, drawing strength from her. Innocent perfection. "It's time to show your father who Mommy really is," I whispered. The Archer Hotel stood like a glass sentinel in downtown Boston, its sleek facade reflecting the late afternoon sun. As Edwina drove, I reviewed the dossier Henrietta had compiled on Pippa Westbrook, 31 years old, former model turned executive consultant, specialized in helping wealthy clients transition to international lifestyles. A euphemism for facilitating disappearances, apparently. "Are you ready for this?" Edwina asked as we pulled into the hotel's circular drive. I checked my reflection in the visor mirror, noting how different I looked from the trusting wife I'd been just weeks ago. My eyes held a hardness that hadn't been there before, a clarity, born of betrayal and resolve. "I've been preparing for this moment my entire career," I replied, smoothing my blouse. "I just never thought I'd be deposing my husband's pregnant girlfriend." The hotel's marble lobby hummed with quiet luxury, muted conversations, the gentle tinkling of piano music, staff moving with practiced deference. At the front desk, I presented myself with the confidence that had won me countless courtroom victories. "Amber Harrington," I said, using the name Miles had registered under. "My husband should be expecting me." The concierge checked his computer, his practiced smile never wavering. "Of course, Mrs. Harrington. Mr. Harrington mentioned you might be joining him. Shall I announce you?" "No need," I replied smoothly. "I'd like to surprise him." Keycard in hand, Edwina and I rode the elevator to the penthouse suite in silence. The gravity of what we were about to do, of what was already happening across town as FBI agents moved to arrest Miles, settled over us like a heavy cloak. "Whatever happens," Edwina said just before the doors opened, "remember why you're doing this." I nodded, the image of Olivia's innocent face fixed firmly in my mind. The suite was silent when we entered, but not empty. Pippa Westbrook sat on the terrace, her back to us, gazing out over the Boston skyline. Even from behind, I could see why. Miles had been captivated. Her elegant profile, the cascade of blonde hair, the poised way she held herself. She hadn't heard us enter. I cleared my throat. Pippa Westbrook? She turned, confusion flickering across her face before recognition, dawned. Her hand instinctively moved to her stomach, a protective gesture I knew all too well from my own pregnancy. "Amber," she said, her voice steadier than I expected. "I've been wondering when this would happen." Not the reaction I had anticipated. No panic, no denial, just a calm acknowledgement that had me momentarily wrong-footed. "May I sit?" I asked, gesturing to the chair opposite her. She nodded, her eyes darting briefly to Edwina, who positioned herself near the door. Not threatening, but decidedly present. "I suppose you're here about the money," Pippa began once I was seated. "Among other things," I acknowledged, "but not in the way you might think." Her perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly. "No?" "No." I leaned forward, maintaining eye contact. "I'm here about your baby." Her composure fractured, fear flashing across her features before she masked it with forced nonchalance. "I don't know what you're talking about." 4 months pregnant, I stated flatly. Receiving prenatal care at Klinik Sonnenberg in Zurich under my name and insurance. Most recent visit showed genetic markers for Erdheim-Chester disease. The color drained from her face. "How did you—" "That's not important," I interrupted. "What's important is that you understand what those markers mean." For the next 10 minutes, I explained the condition my grandfather had lived with, the symptoms, the treatments, the careful monitoring required from birth. As I spoke, Pippa's carefully constructed facade crumbled, revealing the frightened mother-to-be beneath the polished exterior. "Miles never mentioned any of this," she whispered, one hand still protectively cradling her small bump. "Miles doesn't know," I replied. "It's not his side of the family, it's mine." Her eyes widened with understanding. "But if it's your family's condition, and they found markers in my baby." "Miles has been using my medical identity for your care," I confirmed. "Insurance fraud, among his many other crimes." She looked away, guilt battling with defiance. "You don't understand what?" "I understand perfectly," I cut in, my voice firm but not unkind. "You fell in love with a man who promised you the world, who convinced you that I was the villain in his story, cold, career-obsessed, possibly even unaware of his unhappiness." Pippa's silence was confirmation enough. "What you don't understand," I continued, "is that at this very moment, Miles is being arrested by the FBI for embezzlement. The money he's been lavishing on you, the future he's promised you, it's all stolen. From my firm's clients, from our joint accounts, possibly even from your own funds that you entrusted to him." "That's not possible," she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "He has family money, his company. Harrington Financial?" I smiled thinly. "As of this afternoon, I control the majority interest in that company," another detail Miles was unaware of. The shock that registered on her face was almost pitiful. I reached into my purse and removed a folder containing medical information about Erdheim-Chester disease, along with contact information for specialists in Switzerland. "Your baby will need specific care, regardless of what happens with Miles," I said, pushing the folder toward her. "These are the doctors who treated my grandfather. They're the best in the world for this condition." Pippa stared at the folder, then back at me, confusion evident. "Why would you help me after everything?" "I'm not helping you," I clarified. "I'm helping an innocent child who, through no fault of their own, shares a genetic connection with my family." My phone vibrated with an incoming text. I checked it discreetly. A message from my father. "It's done. M in custody. Evidence secured." I turned back to Pippa, whose world was collapsing around her in real time. Miles won't be joining you today, or tomorrow, or for many years to come. She closed her eyes briefly, composing herself before meeting my gaze again. What happens now? That depends largely on you, I replied. Cooperate with the authorities about Miles's financial crimes, and your involvement might be viewed as that of an unknowing participant. Fight, and you'll find yourself implicated as a co-conspirator. I stood, having said what I came to say. The choice is yours, Ms. Westbrook. Choose wisely, for your child's sake. As Edwina and I walked back through the suite, Pippa called after me. He did love you, you know, in the beginning. I paused at the door, considering her words. Perhaps, but love without respect, without honesty, without basic decency, that's not love at all. It's just another form of control. In the elevator, Edwina squeezed my hand. You were magnificent, she said softly. I exhaled slowly, releasing tension I'd been holding for weeks. It's not over yet, I reminded her. There's still one more confrontation to come. Miles? I nodded, a grim determination settling over me. Miles. The federal holding facility lacked the imposing grandeur of a traditional courthouse, but its utilitarian design served its purpose. Clean lines, beige walls, fluorescent lighting that cast everyone in the same unflattering pallor. I had visited places like this dozens of times in my professional capacity, but never as a witness against my own husband. My father waited for me in the sparse lobby, his expression a careful neutral that he'd perfected over decades on the bench. Beside him stood Special Agent Catherine Doyle, a former clerk of his who now headed the FBI's Financial Crimes Division in Boston. Ms. Blackwood, she greeted me, extending her hand. She deliberately used my maiden name, a small courtesy that didn't go unnoticed. Thank you for coming in person. Has he said anything? I asked, bypassing pleasantries. Demanded his lawyer. Claimed a misunderstanding. The usual first reactions, Agent Doyle replied. But when we showed him some of the evidence, particularly the recordings from Mr. Peters, he became significantly less talkative. I nodded, having expected as much. Miles had always calculated odds quickly. He would already be assessing his limited options. He's asked to speak with you, Agent Doyle continued. Obviously, that's entirely your choice. We have more than enough evidence to proceed without any additional testimony. I want to see him, I said firmly. My father stepped forward, concern evident in his eyes. Amber, are you certain that's wise? You've accomplished what was necessary. The legal process will handle the rest. This isn't about the case, I explained. This is about looking him in the eye, just once, and letting him see exactly who I am, who I've always been. After a moment's consideration, he nodded, understanding in his expression. He had raised me to face difficult situations head-on, to find closure through confrontation rather than avoidance. Agent Doyle led us to a small interview room, explaining the protocols, the recording equipment, the observation window, the panic button beneath the table if needed. We'll be right outside, she assured me. And given the circumstances, I've authorized your father and Ms. Lawrence to observe. I smoothed my blazer and checked my reflection in the darkened window. The woman who gazed back at me was composed, determined, unbroken. Good. Miles was brought. In moments later, the stark contrast between his usual polished appearance and his current state immediately apparent. His custom suit had been replaced by standard-issue clothing, his perfectly styled hair disheveled, his confident posture diminished by handcuffs and the weight of his circumstances. Despite everything, seeing him like this sent an unexpected pang through me, not of regret or sympathy, but of something more complex. This man had been my partner, my confidant, my future. Now he was simply case number 47291B, defendant in what would soon become a high-profile federal prosecution. Amber, he said as the guard secured his restraints to the table, His voice held a practiced contrition I recognized from minor disagreements throughout our marriage. "Thank you for coming." I sat across from him, placing my hands flat on the table, a deliberate choice to display my bare ring finger. "You've been busy," he remarked, attempting a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "So have you," I replied evenly. "Embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, identity theft. Quite the resume you've been building." His smile faltered. "There's been a misunderstanding. When all the facts come to light—" "Stop," I interrupted, my voice quiet but firm. "The facts have already come to light, Miles. All of them. Charlie gave us everything. Every transfer, every email, every recorded conversation where you planned to frame him while you disappeared with Pippa and my money." He flinched at Charlie's name, genuine shock crossing his features. "Charlie? But he was. More loyal to the law than to you?" "Yes, it appears so." Miles leaned back, reassessing the situation with the same analytical precision that had once made him a formidable investment banker. "So that's why you're here? To gloat?" "No," I replied calmly. "I'm here because I wanted you to know exactly who bankrupted you, who exposed you, who ended your carefully constructed escape plan. Not some nameless FBI agent, not an anonymous tip. Me. You," he repeated, a hint of his old arrogance returning. "And how exactly did you manage that? Our accounts were joint, but they're empty now. Your firm will fire you once they realize. Your husband was stealing from clients. Your reputation—" "My firm already knows everything," I cut him off. "In fact, they're cooperating fully with the investigation, since the evidence makes it clear this was your operation alone." I allowed myself a small smile. "As for money, that's where things get really interesting." I explained about the trust fund, watching his expression shift from dismissive to stunned as the magnitude of what he'd thrown away dawned on him. $600 million, he repeated, his voice hollow. All this time, I confirmed. "And that's not all. Harrington Financial? Your family legacy that you were so proud of? My grandfather acquired controlling interest 27 years ago. The company you thought was your birthright has actually been part of my family's portfolio for nearly 3 decades." The color drained from his face as the full implications registered. "That's not possible." "I've reviewed the documentation myself," I assured him. "As of yesterday, I've officially assumed control as majority shareholder. Your father will be removed from the board by the end of the week." Miles stared at me as if seeing me for the first time, not as his wife, not as the mother of his child, but as an opponent who had outmaneuvered him at every turn. "Why are you telling me this?" he finally asked, genuine bewilderment in his voice. I leaned forward slightly. "Because I want you to understand what you've lost. Not just your freedom, not just your reputation, but the life you could have had if you'd simply been honest. If you'd been the man I thought you were." "And Olivia?" he asked, something like genuine concern flickering across his features. "Will grow up knowing that her mother stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult," I replied. "As for you, that's for the courts to decide." I stood, having said what I came to say. Miles looked suddenly smaller, diminished not just by his circumstances, but by the knowledge of what he'd thrown away. "Amber," he called as I turned to leave. "What about Pippa? Her baby?" I paused, my hand on the door. "I've insured the child. Will receive proper medical care for their condition. Beyond that, Pippa's fate depends largely on her willingness to cooperate with investigators." "Medical condition?" Confusion clouded his features. "Perhaps you should have paid more attention during those genetic counseling sessions," I suggested. "Or at least asked questions when you were fraudulently using my medical insurance for your girlfriend's prenatal care." I left him with that final revelation, another piece of his carefully constructed plan that he hadn't fully understood. As the door closed behind me, I exhaled deeply, feeling as though I'd finally set down a burden I'd been carrying since that first hospital notification. My father and Edwina were waiting, concern evident in their expressions. "It's done," I said, simply. "He knows everything." "And how do you feel?" my father asked gently. I considered the question, searching for the right words to describe the complex emotions settling over me. "Free," I finally answered. "I feel free." The media eruption was immediate and overwhelming. "Banking heir arrested in massive fraud scheme," screamed the headlines. "Prominent banker embezzled millions while wife gave birth," declared another. Within hours, every major news outlet had picked up the story, their coverage a mix of financial crime reporting and salacious personal details. I had anticipated the publicity, but underestimated its ferocity. Reporters camped outside our brownstone, necessitating security measures that transformed our home into something resembling a fortress. My firm issued a statement expressing shock and emphasizing my complete non-involvement. But the association alone was enough to generate speculation. Through it all, I maintained public silence, focusing instead on Olivia and the legal proceedings that would determine Miles's fate. The evidence against him was overwhelming, not just Charlie's meticulous records, but additional documentation uncovered during the FBI's search of his office and the offshore accounts Henrietta had traced. On the third day following his arrest, I received an unexpected call from Agent Doyle. "He's talking," she informed me without preamble. Full confession, names, dates, accounts, everything. I paused in the middle of folding Olivia's impossibly tiny clothes, surprised by the sudden development. "Why the change of heart?" "His attorney advised cooperation after reviewing the evidence," she explained. "But personally, I think your visit did it. He seems, I don't know, resigned, like he's finally accepting reality." After thanking her, I sat in the nursery's rocking chair, watching Olivia sleep. The confession was practically a formality given the mountain of evidence, but it represented something significant nonetheless. Miles had finally stopped running, stopped lying, stopped pretending. Later that afternoon, a courier arrived with a thick envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, 20 pages of Miles's distinctive script addressed to me. I hesitated before opening it, unsure whether I wanted to subject myself to whatever justifications or manipulations it might contain. "You don't have to read it," Edwina advised when I showed her the envelope. "You don't owe him your attention." No, I acknowledged, but I think I need to. For closure. Alone in my study, with Olivia napping under my father's watchful eye, I finally opened the letter. "Amber, by the time you read this, my formal confession will be recorded. There's nothing in these pages that will change the legal proceedings, nothing that will mitigate what I've done. This isn't a plea for mercy or understanding. It's simply the truth, something I should have offered you long ago. I never intended for any of this to happen." That sounds like an excuse, but it's where I need to start. When we met at Harvard, everything I told you about myself was true. I was the ambitious son determined to restore my family's financial legacy. I genuinely believed Harrington Financial was mine to inherit, to build upon. Learning that it has actually belonged to your family all these years explains so much about my father's bitterness, his constant pressure, his insistence that I reclaim our position. I loved you then, truly. You were everything I admired, brilliant, driven, principled. I wasn't pretending during those early years. Our life together, our plans, our connection, it was real. The change began 3 years ago when several investments collapsed simultaneously. Private investments my father had pressured me into, using money I didn't actually have. I borrowed against our future, convinced I could fix it before you ever knew there was a problem. One desperate decision led to another, each one taking me further from the man you thought I was, the man I wanted to be. Pippa wasn't planned. We met during that Tokyo conference when I was particularly low, drinking too much, feeling trapped by mounting debts and lies. She represented escape, simplicity, a world without the constant fear of discovery. I told myself it was temporary, meaningless. By the time I realized it had become something else entirely, I was already in too deep to find an honorable way out. When you told me you were pregnant, I should have been overjoyed. Instead, I panicked. Another responsibility. Another person, who would eventually discover my failures. I considered coming clean then, facing the consequences, but cowardice won out. I convinced myself I could maintain both lives long enough to escape the mess I'd created. None of this excuses what I did. The embezzlement, the lies, the betrayal while you were giving birth, these actions define me now, not my intentions or regrets. I've lost the right to ask anything of you, but I'm asking anyway. Please tell Olivia something of the man I tried to be, not just the man I became. Someday, when she's old enough to understand, help her see that people can make terrible mistakes without being terrible at their core. I will plead guilty to all charges. I will accept whatever sentence is imposed. I will make no claims on our daughter or attempts to contact you after this letter. You deserve to rebuild your life without my shadow hanging over you. The irony isn't lost on me that you had access to wealth beyond my imagining all along, that the company I thought was my birthright has always been under your family's control. But the greatest loss isn't financial. It's you. It's Olivia. It's the life we could have had if I'd been brave enough to be honest. I'm sorry, Amber. Not for being caught, not for facing consequences, but for failing to be the man you deserved. For betraying the trust of the most trustworthy person I've ever known. Miles, I read the letter twice, searching for manipulation, for subtle attempts to evoke sympathy or plant seeds of doubt. Instead, I found only stark honesty, perhaps the first truly honest communication from Miles in years. It changed nothing about the legal proceedings. It repaired nothing of what had been broken, but it offered something I hadn't realized I needed. Understanding. Not forgiveness. That would take longer if it ever came, but a framework to process what had happened, to eventually explain to Olivia why her father wasn't in her life. That evening, as I nursed Olivia in the quiet of her nursery, I felt an unexpected sense of peace settle over me. Miles's confession had freed me from the nagging questions that might have haunted me for years, the why, the how, the when it all changed. The answers weren't pretty, but they were real, and reality was something I could build upon. I looked down at my daughter's perfect face, her tiny hand wrapped around my finger with surprising strength. Your father made terrible mistakes, I whispered to her, but someday, I'll tell you about the man he could have been, and more importantly, I'll show you who you can become. Someone strong enough to face truth, brave enough to demand justice, and wise enough to know the difference between understanding and excusing. She blinked up at me, her expression solemn as if absorbing my words, before drifting back to sleep. Outside my window, I could see the last of the reporters finally packing up their equipment, moving on to the next scandal. The media storm would eventually pass. The legal proceedings would conclude. Life would find its new rhythm, and we would be ready. 3 months after Miles's arrest, on a bright July morning, I stood in the federal courthouse, watching as he entered his formal guilty plea. The proceeding was brief, clinical, a stark contrast to the emotional chaos that had preceded it. Miles, thinner now and dressed in a suit that hung slightly loose on his frame, spoke in clear, measured tones as he admitted to all charges. "How do you plead?" Judge Thornton asked after each count was read. "Guilty, Your Honor," Miles repeated, 16 times in total. I sat in the back row, observing not as his wife, but as another attorney in the room, analyzing the procedural elements with professional detachment. Miles never turned to look for me in the gallery, respecting the boundary I had established in my only response to his confession letter. "I will attend the plea hearing. Please do not acknowledge me." When the judge scheduled sentencing for the following month and remanded Miles back into custody, I felt an unexpected sense of finality. This chapter was closing, not with dramatic confrontation, but with the mundane machinery of justice. Paperwork, docket numbers, scheduling orders. Outside, the courthouse, away from the reporters still hungry for a statement, Edwina handed me a thick envelope. "The divorce papers," she confirmed, "ready for your signature." I had delayed filing, wanting to wait until after the plea was entered. Now there was nothing holding me back. The terms were straightforward: full custody of Olivia, no spousal, support in either direction, complete separation of assets. Miles had agreed to everything without negotiation. "Are you sure about the name change?" Edwina asked as I reviewed the documents one last time. I nodded. Olivia deserves a fresh start, free from the baggage of the Harrington name. Olivia Blackwood connects her to a legacy of strength, not scandal. That evening, alone in my study, after signing the papers that would legally end my marriage, I found myself at a crossroads. The immediate crisis had passed. The legal matters were proceeding as expected. Financial security was assured. But the larger question remained. What now? My firm had granted me extended leave, making it clear my position awaited whenever I was ready to return. The trust was fully under my control, generating more income than I could reasonably spend in a lifetime. Harrington Financial, now quietly rebranded as Blackwood Capital, was operating under new management, its reputation slowly recovering from Miles's crimes. All the external pieces were falling into place. Yet internally, I still felt unsettled, as if waiting for the next crisis to emerge. My father found me sitting in the dark, Olivia asleep in my arms as I contemplated the path forward. "It's time," he said simply, sitting beside me. "Time for what?" "Time to stop reacting and start creating," he clarified. "You've handled the crisis brilliantly, protected yourself, protected Olivia, ensured justice. But that's defense. Now you need offense." I considered his words, recognizing their truth. Since discovering Miles's betrayal, every action had been responsive. Investigating his crimes, securing my assets, navigating the legal system. I had been so focused on addressing the immediate threat that I hadn't allowed myself to envision a future beyond it. "What do you want, Amber?" my father asked gently. "Not what do you need to protect, not what do you need to fix. What do you want to build?" The question lingered in the air between us, compelling me to look beyond survival to possibility. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to contemplate not just what I was leaving behind, but what lay ahead, what I might create from the ashes of betrayal. I began slowly, the vision taking shape as I spoke, to build something meaningful. The media eventually tired of our story, particularly after Miles received his 15-year sentence without the dramatic courtroom confrontation they'd hoped for. We faded from the headlines, replaced by newer scandals and fresher outrage. The reporters outside our home dwindled from dozens to none, allowing a semblance of normalcy to return. Divorce became final with the same bureaucratic efficiency that had characterized the criminal proceedings. Paperwork filed, waiting periods observed, signatures authenticated. The legal dissolution of our marriage was completed exactly 6 months after Miles's betrayal came to light, marked only by a certified letter confirming my return to Blackwood as my legal surname. My father returned to his life in Westchester, though he visited weekly, his gruff exterior softening noticeably around Olivia. Edwina and Henrietta, having seen me through the worst of the crisis, resumed their demanding careers while remaining constant presences in our lives. Charlie, granted immunity for his cooperation, relocated to Chicago to rebuild his career away from the lingering shadow of the scandal, and I began the painstaking process of reconstructing a life that bore little resemblance to what I had planned. The brownstone, once my dream home, now felt tainted by memories of a marriage built on deception, Each room held echoes of conversations that seemed hollow in retrospect, moments of supposed intimacy that I now questioned. After weeks of waking in the middle of the night, unsettled by the familiar surroundings, I made my decision. I'm selling the house, I announced during Sunday brunch with Edwina and Henrietta. Olivia, now 5 months old and developing a personality as determined as my own, babbled in her bouncer beside us. "Where will you go?" Henrietta asked, not questioning the decision itself, which seemed inevitable to those who knew me best. "My grandfather's estate in Concord," I replied. "It's been sitting empty since he passed. The trust administrators have maintained it, but it needs life again." The property was a New England classic. 15 acres of rolling land, a historic main house updated with modern amenities, gardens that had once been my grandmother's pride. Most importantly, it held no memories of Miles, no associations with the life that had unraveled so spectacularly. As autumn painted Massachusetts in brilliant color, Olivia and I settled into our new home. The move represented more than a change of address. It was a deliberate step toward reclaiming agency over my narrative. Each room I renovated, each decision I made about the property, reinforced my autonomy. The first major gathering at our new home was Olivia's christening, a small ceremony attended only by our closest circle. Standing in the garden where I had played as a child, watching my father cradle his granddaughter with uncharacteristic gentleness, I felt an unexpected sense of alignment. As if despite the painful detour, I had somehow arrived exactly where I was meant to be. "You're different," Edwina observed later as we sat on the terrace, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Not just stronger, more purposeful." I considered her assessment, recognizing its accuracy. The betrayal had forced me to excavate and examine parts of myself long subsumed by the comfortable patterns of my marriage. The woman who emerged from that painful archaeology was indeed different, more defined, more deliberate in her choices. "Necessary adaptation," I suggested, sipping my wine. "Like legal evolution after a significant precedent changes the landscape." Edwina smiled at the lawyer's metaphor. "And what precedent has been established here?" I looked toward the nursery, window where Olivia had just been put down for the night, then back at the vast property stretching before us, the tangible beginning of our new life. "That endings can be beginnings," I replied. "That what's broken doesn't define what can be built." The autumn breeze carried the scent of wood smoke and ripening apples, sensory anchors to this moment of transition. Miles was gone, our shared life dismantled. Yet here, in this place of new beginnings, I felt strangely complete, as if the painful fracture had allowed something essential to finally emerge intact. Winter descended on Concord with unforgiving intensity. Snow blanketed the estate, transforming the landscape into a pristine white canvas broken only by the dark silhouettes of ancient oaks. Inside, fires burned constantly in the hearths, creating pockets of warmth throughout the sprawling house. On the surface, our new life had taken shape with remarkable efficiency. The brownstones sold quickly and well above asking price. My firm had arranged for me to work remotely when my leave ended, acknowledging both my value and my changed circumstances. Olivia thrived in the peaceful surroundings, growing more curious and engaged each day. Yet as the external pieces fell into place, I found myself confronting an unexpected internal struggle. The isolation of winter, the quiet of country living, the long nights with only Olivia's occasional cries to break the silence, all created space for delayed emotions to finally surface. It began with dreams, vivid reconstructions of moments, with Miles that now played out with sinister undertones, as if my sleeping mind was reprocessing memories through the lens of what I now knew. I would wake breathless, disoriented, reaching for a husband who was never there and now existed only as a cautionary tale. During daylight hours, I maintained control, focusing on Olivia, on work, on the practical demands of our new reality. But at night, when the house creaked with winter winds and tomorrow seemed impossibly distant, doubt crept in with insidious persistence. Had I missed obvious signs? Could I trust my judgment ever again? What would happen when Olivia was old enough to ask about her father? The questions circled like hungry wolves, threatening to devour the careful composure I'd maintained through the public ordeal. On a particularly brutal January night, with a blizzard howling outside and Olivia finally asleep after hours of inexplicable fussiness, the facade cracked. I found myself sitting on the kitchen floor, surrounded by the artifacts of my new life: baby bottles, legal briefs, renovation plans, sobbing with an intensity that frightened me. It wasn't grief for Miles or the marriage. That loss had been processed during the methodical dismantling of our life together. This was deeper, more fundamental. Grief for the certainty I'd once possessed, the unshakable confidence in my ability to discern truth from fiction, authenticity from performance. What if I'm wrong about everything? I whispered to the empty kitchen, giving voice to the fear that had been building since the initial shock faded. What if I never really know anyone again? The baby monitor crackled with Olivia's soft breathing, the sound both comforting and terrifying in its vulnerability. She trusted me implicitly, completely, her existence entirely dependent on my judgment, my decisions, my ability to protect her from harm, just as I had once trusted Miles. The parallel sent a fresh wave of panic through me. I hugged my knees to my chest, rocking slightly, trying to regulate my breathing through techniques that had served me well in courtroom crises, but seemed woefully inadequate for this personal tempest. The antique wall phone rang, startling me from the spiral. Few people had this number, a deliberate choice to limit intrusions into our sanctuary. Wiping my face, I answered with the composed tone I'd perfected through months of necessary performance. Amber? My father's voice, concern evident despite the static on the line. The storm knocked out power in half the county. Are you and Olivia all right? We're fine, I assured him automatically. Generators running, we have plenty of supplies. A pause, then, and you? Are you all right? The simple question, asked with such genuine concern, nearly undid me again. I considered offering the standard reassurance, maintaining the image of unshakable resilience I'd cultivated so carefully. Instead, I took a shuddering breath and spoke the truth I'd been denying even to myself. No, I admitted, my voice barely audible. I'm not all right at all. My father's response was immediate and uncharacteristically gentle. I'll be there in an hour. Stay warm. After hanging up, I remained on the kitchen floor, simultaneously ashamed of my breakdown and relieved by the simple act of acknowledgement. The pretense of perfect recovery had become its own kind of prison, isolating me as effectively as Miles's betrayal. Outside, the storm continued its assault, wind howling through bare branches like a physical manifestation of my internal turmoil. But for the first time since discovering Miles's deception, I allowed myself to fully feel its impact, not as a strategic problem to solve, but as a profound wound requiring genuine healing. My father arrived through the blizzard as promised, snow-coating his usually immaculate appearance, concern etched into the lines of his face. He said nothing about finding me red-eyed and disheveled, simply hung his coat by the fire and made tea with the practiced movements of a man accustomed to caring for himself. When your mother died, he began without preamble, placing a steaming mug before me. I thought I would never trust my judgment again. I looked up, surprised. My father rarely spoke of my mother's illness and death when I was 12, a subject treated as closed, processed, resolved through his characteristic stoicism. You were always so certain, I said, so definitive about everything. He shook his head, a sad smile playing at the corners of his mouth. That came later. For the first year, I questioned every decision. Should I have insisted on different treatments? Should I have taken her to Switzerland sooner? Should I have noticed the symptoms before they became unmanageable? The parallels to my own circular questioning were unmistakable. What changed? I asked. Time, partially, he acknowledged. But mostly, I realized something important. Doubt serves a purpose, but it cannot be allowed to become your primary residence. He reached across the table, covering my hand with his own. You're not wrong to question, Amber. You're wrong to believe those questions define you. The simple wisdom of his statement penetrated the fog that had enveloped me for weeks. My father stayed through the night, sleeping in the guest room nearest Olivia's nursery, his presence a quiet affirmation that vulnerability wasn't weakness, it was necessary humanity. When spring finally softened the landscape, melting snow to reveal the first tentative crocuses pushing through the soil, something within me thawed as well. The dark night hadn't passed completely. Moments of doubt still surfaced without warning, but they no longer threatened to consume me. I began venturing beyond our property, reconnecting with the outside world. First through small steps, farmers, markets in Concord, coffee with old colleagues who visited from Boston, then more deliberately, attending legal symposiums and trust foundation meetings. At one such event, I encountered Elise Hammond, founder of a nonprofit supporting women, rebuilding their lives after financial abuse. Over lunch, I shared a carefully edited version of my experience, expecting the usual mix of shock and pity. Instead, she leaned forward with determined intensity. You know, we've been looking for someone to head our legal advocacy division. Someone who understands both the technical aspects and the emotional reality. I have a job, I replied automatically. My firm has been very accommodating. Of course, she nodded. But is it what you want? Or is it what you had planned before everything changed? The question lingered long after our conversation ended. My partnership at Montgomery & Reed represented years of dedication, countless hours proving my worth in an environment that rarely acknowledged female achievement without qualification. Walking away would mean surrendering something I had fought to achieve. Yet when I considered returning to corporate law full-time, defending wealthy clients and navigating office politics, I felt none of the ambition that had once driven me. The path that had seemed so clearly defined now felt like someone else's journey, a route mapped for a woman who hadn't yet experienced how quickly certainty could dissolve into betrayal. One evening, as twilight settled over the estate, and Olivia practiced standing while holding onto the coffee table, I found myself watching her with newfound clarity. Her determination to master this new skill, falling, rising, trying again with unwavering resolve, mirrored something awakening within me. You're finding your balance, I told her, though the observation was equally applicable to myself. She responded with a delighted babble, releasing the table to stand unsupported for 3 precious seconds before toppling onto the cushions I'd arranged for inevitable falls. Immediately, she pushed herself up again, undeterred by temporary failure. You're right, I agreed with her, unspoken persistence. We keep going. That night I called Elise Hammond and arranged to meet about the position. Not because I had fully resolved my doubts or completely processed my experience, but because I recognized that healing wouldn't come from retreat. It would come from moving forward, from transforming personal pain into purposeful action. The path ahead remained uncertain, but for the first time since Miles's betrayal, uncertainty felt less like vulnerability and more like possibility. 12 months after Miles's arrest, I stood at the podium of a conference center in downtown Boston, looking out at a sea of attentive faces, lawyers, financial experts, law enforcement personnel, and survivors of economic abuse. As the newly appointed director of legal advocacy for the Hammond Foundation, I was delivering the keynote address at our first national symposium. Financial betrayal is rarely just about money, I explained, my voice steady despite the personal resonance of my words. It's about power, control, and the deliberate undermining of autonomy. When someone you trust violates that relationship, through economic deception, they're not just stealing assets. They're attempting to steal your agency, your security, your future. The audience nodded in recognition, many taking notes or recording the session. In the front row sat my strongest supporters, Edwina and Henrietta flanking my father, who held Olivia on his lap. At 18 months old, she was unlikely to understand the proceedings, but I wanted her present for this milestone, even if only I knew its significance. Our foundation's mission goes beyond crisis intervention, I continued. We're creating systemic change, pressing for legislative reform, establishing precedents in family courts, and providing financial literacy education to vulnerable populations. Because knowledge, as we all know, is more than power. It's protection. As I outlined our initiatives and introduced the experts who would lead subsequent sessions, I observed the faces before me with a lawyer's practiced attention. They represented the various touchpoints of my own journey, legal professionals who understood the technical aspects, advocates who recognized the emotional toll, survivors whose experiences echoed elements of my own story. My remarks complete, I moved to the side of the stage while the Foundation's founder took my place to introduce the day's agenda. The transition from corporate attorney to nonprofit director had not been without challenges. A significant salary reduction despite my personal wealth, the steep learning curve of advocacy work, the skepticism from former colleagues who viewed my career change as an emotional reaction rather than a deliberate choice. Yet as I watched the symposium unfold, these challenges seemed insignificant compared to the work's meaning. In helping others navigate circumstances similar to my own, I had discovered purpose more satisfying than any courtroom victory. The true test came during the afternoon panel discussion where I had agreed, after months of consideration, to publicly acknowledge my personal connection to our mission. Not in lurid detail, Olivia's privacy remained paramount, but with enough transparency to lend authenticity to our work. My understanding of financial exploitation isn't purely academic, I explained when the moderator broached the subject. 2 years ago, I was a partner at a prestigious firm, married to an investment banker, with a baby on the way and complete confidence in my future. 18 months ago, I discovered my husband had systematically emptied our accounts while I was in labor, part of a broader pattern of financial crimes that ultimately resulted in his incarceration. A hushed silence fell over the room. Though the case had received media coverage, this was my first public statement about the experience. I was fortunate, I continued. I had resources many victims lack: legal expertise, financial safety nets, professional connections. Even with these advantages, the journey through betrayal, legal proceedings, and rebuilding was profoundly challenging. For those without such resources, the path can seem impossible. I looked directly at the audience, meeting their gaze with hard-won confidence. That's why our work matters. That's why I stand before you not just as an attorney, but as someone who understands that recovering from financial abuse requires more than legal remedies. It requires a fundamental reclamation of trust, agency, and self-belief. The discussion that followed was the most meaningful professional exchange of my career. Honest, nuanced, occasionally raw. Practitioners shared challenges I hadn't considered. Survivors offered perspectives that expanded my understanding. Law enforcement detailed investigative approaches that might have accelerated my own case. As the session concluded to enthusiastic applause, I stepped from the stage feeling a sense of integration I hadn't experienced since before Miles's betrayal, as if the fractured pieces of my identity were finally realigning into a cohesive whole. My father approached, Olivia squirming happily in his arms. "You did well," he said simply, the understated praise carrying more weight than effusive compliments. From anyone else. It wasn't easy, I admitted. The worthwhile challenges rarely are, he replied, passing my daughter into my waiting arms. Holding Olivia close, I surveyed the room where attendees continued discussing strategies and sharing resources. The foundation's work was just beginning, facing formidable obstacles from limited funding to institutional resistance. Yet for the first time, these challenges felt less like burdens and more like opportunities, chances to demonstrate the resilience that had carried me through my own darkest moments. "Ready for what comes next?" Edwina asked, joining us. I nodded, bouncing Olivia gently as she played with my necklace. More than ready. 3 years to the day after Miles's betrayal came to light, I stood in the garden of our conquered home, watching Olivia chase butterflies through carefully tended flower beds. At 4 years old, she was a whirlwind of energy and questions, her dark curls bouncing as she explored the world with infectious enthusiasm. "Mommy, look!" She pointed excitedly at a monarch butterfly resting on a purple coneflower. "It's the same color as your special dress," I smiled at her observation. The special dress was what she called the outfit I wore for important foundation events, a deep orange sheath that had become something of a signature as our advocacy work gained national recognition. "It is," I agreed, kneeling beside her. "Nature has the best design ideas." The Hammond Foundation had expanded beyond our initial projections, now operating in 12 states with a growing legal team specializing in economic justice. My role had evolved from program director to executive leadership, balancing strategic vision with hands-on advocacy that kept me connected to the individuals we served. Miles remained in federal prison halfway through his sentence. Our communication was limited to matters directly concerning Olivia, though these were infrequent. He had respected my boundaries, never attempting to insert himself into our lives beyond the occasional birthday card or holiday greeting for his daughter. Olivia knew a carefully age-appropriate version of her father's absence, that he had made mistakes that hurt people and was now making amends. Someday, when she was older, the full story would be necessary. For now, this simplified truth seemed sufficient for her developing understanding. My personal life had found its own quiet equilibrium. I dated occasionally, approaching relationships with hard-earned discernment rather than the desperate avoidance or reckless abandon that might have characterized earlier attempts at moving forward. Some prospects had been deterred by the complexities of my past. Others had demonstrated insufficient depth for the woman I had become. I was in no rush. The desperate need for partnership that had once defined my concept of success had been replaced by a more holistic understanding of fulfillment, meaningful work, true friendships, the joy of motherhood, and the quiet satisfaction of living authentically. "Amber," Edwina called from the patio where she was setting up for the small gathering we'd planned. "Your father just arrived." I lifted Olivia into my arms, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair mingled with garden flowers. "Ready to show Grandpa your butterfly garden?" She nodded enthusiastically. "And tell him about my new school." As we walked toward the house, I caught sight of myself reflected in the French doors, a woman I now recognized and respected, bearing little resemblance to the shell-shocked new mother who had discovered her husband's betrayal during her most vulnerable moment. The transformation hadn't been instantaneous or without setbacks. There had been days of doubt, nights of anger, moments when the weight of rebuilding had seemed insurmountable, but like the garden that had evolved from neglected grounds to thriving ecosystem, the reconstruction had occurred through consistent attention, deliberate choices, and the patience to allow natural growth processes their necessary time. The $600 million trust fund that had once represented my emergency safety net had become a powerful tool for systemic change, funding legal, clinics, financial literacy programs, and policy initiatives aimed at preventing others from experiencing similar betrayals. As my father embraced his granddaughter with unguarded affection, I felt a sense of completion that transcended simple happiness. This hard-won peace, neither perfect nor guaranteed, but authentic and earned, was perhaps the most valuable asset I possessed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.